This is Rummy's Corner. In my humble opinion, Michael Spinks has to be one of the most underrated and underappreciated boxers in the last 40 years. The reason I say this is because whenever I see his name mentioned in boxing forums or on social media, it feels like 90% of the time it's about one of two things. One, people complaining that Larry Holmes was robbed in his 2 losses against Spinks. And 2, people criticizing Mike Tyson and downplaying his career-defining victory as an overrated win against nothing more than a blown-up light heavyweight. If you never knew anything about Michael Spinks, and you learned about him reading most of the posts when his name is mentioned, you'd think he was just some random alphabet titleist at 175 who got 2 lucky gifts against Larry before being knocked out by Prime Iron Mike and retiring. But the truth is that Michael Spinks was a complete and total legit badass and a bona fide all-time great. Spinks was a former Olympic gold medalist in 1976, and he got his first opportunity to compete for a title when he challenged WBA light heavyweight champion Eddie Mustafa Muhammad back in July 1981. The champion got off to a decent start in the earlier rounds, but Spinks began asserting himself in round 5 and never looked back. Spinks seized control, scoring a knockdown along the way in round 12. Spinks maintained control for the final duration, and at the conclusion of 15 rounds, Michael Spinks was awarded a unanimous decision victory, which earned him the WBA championship. Spinks made his first title defense in November 1981, when he scored a 7th round stoppage against Von Zell Johnson. The following month in December, Dwight Muhammad Cowie defeated Matthew Saad Muhammad by 10th round stoppage to become the new WBC light heavyweight champion. At that time, these were the only 2 major world titles in boxing. Spinks made his second title defense in February 1982 when he stopped Mustafa Wasaja in round 6. His third title defense happened in April 1982, when he scored an 8th round stoppage in his rematch against Murray Sutherland, whom he had beaten by 10-round unanimous decision before becoming champion nearly 2 years prior. Spinks made his 4th title defense in June 1982, when he scored an 8th round stoppage against Jerry Celestine. Title defense number 5 happened in September 1982 when Spinks stopped Johnny Davis in round 9. This paved the way for the showdown between Spinks and Cowie for undisputed light heavyweight supremacy. But before that big-time showdown came together, tragedy struck for Michael Spinks when his wife died in a car accident in January 1983. 2 months later, Spinks squared off against Cowie in a unification bout for the undisputed light heavyweight world championship. Then known as Dwight Braxton, Cowie was having difficulty coping with the technical approach from Spinks. Cowie started coming on stronger in the middle rounds, and he scored an official knockdown in round 8, but by and large, Spinks was the one dictating the rhythm and controlling the action. At the end of 15 rounds, Spinks was awarded a unanimous decision, making him the undisputed WBA WBC light heavyweight world champion. This marked Spinks as the first undisputed light heavyweight champion since Bob Foster last held that recognition way back in 1974. After a scheduled July rematch with Eddie Mustafa Muhammad was canceled when Muhammad failed to make weight, Spinks ultimately returned to action in November 1983. Spinks made his 7th title defense when he scored a 10th round stoppage against Oscar Rivadeneira. In February 1984, Spinks defended the undisputed crown against Eddie Davis, where in addition to the WBA and WBC, the newly formed IBF was also on the line. Eddie was the brother of Johnny Davis, who Spinks had defeated a year and a half earlier. Spinks won a 12-round unanimous decision to make his 8th defense. He was scheduled to have a rematch with Cowie that September, but Cowie pulled out with an injury. So after a year of inactivity, in February 1985, Spinks made title defense number 9 when he defended the undisputed crown with a third-round stoppage win against David Sears. Then in June 1985, he again defended the undisputed championship, this time stopping Jim McDonald in round 10. That would be the 10th and final light heavyweight title defense for Michael Spinks. In September 1985, Spinks moved up to challenge the reigning IBF and lineal heavyweight world champion, Larry Holmes, the Easton Assassin. Holmes entered the contest with a perfect 48-0 record, and he had accumulated 20 consecutive title defenses. Only the great Joe Louis had more, and much was made of the fact that if Larry won against Spinks, he would match the 49-0 mark set by former heavyweight champion Rocky Marciano. But Michael Spinks' jinx was the one who made history that night, with a brilliant blend of speed, quickness, and aggressiveness. Spinks boxed exceptionally well. Spinks was using great movement and putting together sneaky attacks with quick combinations that left Holmes looking uncharacteristically confused. It took Holmes until around the halfway point before he started finding any rhythm with his jab, and Michael did an outstanding job neutralizing Larry's right hand. At the end of 15 rounds, Spinks made boxing history when he was awarded a unanimous decision. For starters, the victory marked the first time two brothers had ever won the heavyweight world championship, a feat his brother Leon had achieved 7 years earlier when he scored an upset win against Muhammad Ali. Incidentally, the two Spinks brothers also both won gold medals in '76. But for Michael, it was also the first time in the long, rich history of boxing that a light heavyweight champion moved up to win the heavyweight championship. The only other time someone won titles at heavyweight and light heavyweight was Bob Fitzsimmons, but he was heavyweight champion before he won the light heavyweight crown. Incidentally, Fitzsimmons had also won the middleweight championship. Spinks and Holmes had a rematch in April 1986, and the Easton Assassin put forth a much more spirited effort this time around. But at the conclusion of 15 rounds, Spinks was again awarded the victory, this time by split decision. Spinks made the second defense of the IBF Heavyweight Championship in September 1986 when he stopped Stefan Tangstad in round 4. In February 1987, Spinks was stripped by the IBF for not coming to terms with their number one mandatory challenger, Tony Tucker. Instead, Spinks opted for a more lucrative route when he faced Jerry Cooney in June 1987. Spinks won the fight and stopped Cooney in round 5. Despite no longer holding an alphabet belt, Spinks still held a rightful claim to the heavyweight lineage. By August 1987, Iron Mike Tyson had won all 3 alphabet titles, one by one, and he was actively defending those titles. Iron Mike beat Tyrell Biggs in October '87. Then he beat the Easton Assassin in January 1988. And then he beat Tony Tubbs in March 1988. This paved the way for the showdown between Iron Mike and the Spinks Jinx in June 1988. And of course, Tyson solidified his undisputed claim to the heavyweight world championship beyond reproach when he earned a valid claim to the lineal heavyweight championship, the man who beat the man. Spinks retired a month later, and his official record was 31 wins, 21 by way of knockout, and only 1 defeat suffered. So what is the truth about Michael Spinks? The truth is, he is one of the greatest light heavyweights of all time. I said earlier that 90% of the time I see Spinks' name mentioned, it's either people talking about the Holmes fights or the Tyson loss. And that's true, but I do believe the silent majority of boxing history buffs rightly recognize Spinks as one of the very best to ever do it at 175. The truth is, Michael Spinks was one of the most talented and accomplished and formidable warriors to ever lace him up during the long, rich history of the light heavyweight division. I mean, I don't know if you could rank him ahead of guys like Ezzard Charles and the Old Mongoose, but he's right there in that same company. The survey I did a couple of years back had Spinks rated as the number 3 light heavyweight all time. And even though I did not participate in the survey myself, I do personally 100% agree with the top 3. Spinks belongs up there near the top alongside legends like the Cincinnati Cobra and the Old Mongoose. And if you consider head-to-head as your main criteria, well, I think he's damn good there too. If you had a hypothetical round-robin tournament between the top 20 light heavyweights of all time, I wouldn't be at all surprised if Spinks emerged with the best record of the bunch. The point here is that even before he moved to heavyweight, Michael Spinks already had bona fide Hall of Fame credentials based on his body of work at 175. Even to this day, there hasn't really been an undisputed light heavyweight champion since. Roy Jones Jr. did technically unify all 3 alphabet belts of his day back in the 1990s at light heavy. But unlike what Mike Tyson did at heavyweight, when he beat Spinks to earn a rightful claim to the lineal world championship, Roy never beat Michalczewski, who was the lineal light heavyweight champion at that time. But Spinks accomplished a lot at light heavyweight, 10 consecutive title defenses. Undefeated, including 11 championship contests at the weight, and he beat some damn good fighters during his reign, which leads us to his historically significant victory against the Easton Assassin. First brothers to become heavyweight champion is a rather interesting distinction, and the fact that this feat was later repeated by the Klitschko brothers kind of makes it all the more interesting when you consider the context of the brothers Spinks and the brothers Klitschko. But the more significant individual accomplishment here was becoming the first light heavyweight champion to win the heavyweight championship. Many other great light heavyweights over the years tried and failed. Billy Conn couldn't do it. Bob Foster couldn't do it. Even Archie Moore, the Old Mongoose himself, couldn't do it. But Michael Spinks did it, and he was the first. As for the wins against Holmes being robberies, that's a word I generally believe gets thrown around too often by boxing fans whenever there is a close and competitive contest. Both of the fights were close and competitive, but having rewatched both in their entirety recently, Spinks truly did a fantastic job in the first fight. Spinks had a game plan that was very well executed, where he had Holmes looking uncharacteristically confused and off balance. And he really did do an outstanding job shutting down Larry's right hand. And he did a very good job shutting down Larry's ability to find any type of groove with his jab over the first half of the fight. As for the rematch, I did personally think Holmes edged it. He got off to a fast and aggressive start in that one, where it took Michael some time to really get going. But even here, he made a strong account of himself in this one. And once he did get going, he often had Holmes on the defensive and again looking a bit confused. They were both close and competitive championship contests. And at the end of the day, Michael Spinks got the nod in both. As for the fight with Mike Tyson, those who refer to Spinks as nothing more than a blown-up light heavyweight do both fighters an injustice in my opinion. Iron Mike Tyson was firing on all cylinders that night, and he was arguably at his absolute peak that night. The historical implications for this one were also extremely significant. Indeed, we had only seen this type of thing once before, in the fight of the century, the first encounter between Muhammad Ali and Smokin' Joe Frazier. That was an unprecedented unique situation, where we had 2 undefeated heavyweights, who each had a legitimate claim to call themselves heavyweight world champion. Muhammad Ali had never lost his throne inside the ring, and in his absence, Frazier had become the new champion. And Ali and Frazier were the only 2 at that time who could make that claim. It was the same thing with Tyson and Spinks, 2 undefeated heavyweights, each of whom could call himself heavyweight world champion, and the only 2 who could. The historical implications were identical, and that context often gets overlooked when considering the historical significance of Tyson's victory against Spinks. Unfortunately for Michael Spinks, that loss has largely defined his career in the eyes of many. It's a bizarre thing that usually doesn't happen. A lot of all-time great boxers have ended their careers suffering knockout losses. And generally speaking, those losses tend to be put in the proper context and are forgiven and overlooked when it comes to critiquing all-time greats at their best. But Michael Spinks seems to be one of those rare exceptions where that lone loss overshadowed all of his other outstanding achievements. And for Pete's sake, the guy was up against prime Iron Mike Tyson at the height of his powers. Michael Spinks might be unfairly best remembered for his loss against Iron Mike, but when you look at his entire career, with his impressive undefeated, undisputed championship run at 175, and him becoming the first light heavyweight champion to win the heavyweight world championship, he was undoubtedly one of the best boxers of all time. The simple truth of the matter is that Michael Spinks was indeed a complete and total legit badass and a bona fide all-time great. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed and have a wonderful night. This is Rummy's Corner.